Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome back. We're going to be continuing on reading the Christ letters. We stopped right before beginning a new section of letter 1. So we're going to pick up right where we left off. Now let's see. All right. So where we left off, Jesus was going to talk about my early life and experiences in the desert. And just note that even though this section is titled that way, Jesus does refer to his experience in the desert throughout the book, as well as his early life throughout the next few letters. And as we go along in these letters and the information gets a little bit deeper, I may not read quite as long. I may break them up into smaller chunks. So I'm just kind of seeing and feeling out how it goes as we go along together. All right. I was born in Palestine. My mother was convinced that I would be a Messiah. Contrary to popular belief, I was not a saintly child. When taken to the temple, aged 12 years old, to be interviewed by the chief priests to determine whether I would be fit to enter Jewish religious training, I was rejected as being too opinionated. Bitterly disappointed, my mother took me home again and did her best to raise me in the sanctity, which marked her own demeanor at all times. This was an impossible task, for I was, above all things, an individualist and unruly in behavior. I resented my mother's guidance and her attempted discipline. As a youth, I became unmanageable, a true rebel. I rejected my mother's staunch adherence to the Jewish faith and traditions, preferring laughter to sanctimonious attitudes. I refused to learn a trade which would have bound me down to routine. I chose to mix with all and sundry of the poorer classes, drank with them, knew prostitutes, and enjoyed talking, arguing, laughing, and being bone idle. When I needed money, I went into the vineyards for a day or two, or took other jobs paying me enough to eat and drink and give me the leisure I craved. For all my many shortcomings as a human being, my careless, easy, indolent attitudes, my self-will, and egocentric determination to think my own thoughts, irrespective of what others might try to tell me, I cared about people very deeply. I was deeply emotional. In your present speech forms, you would call me overreactive, over-emotional. I had a warm, compassionate, empathetic heart. I was deeply moved in the presence of sickness, affliction, and poverty. I was a staunch supporter of what you call the underdog. You might say I was a people's person. I lived with them closely in a spirit of camaraderie. I listened to their woes, understood, and cared. And just so you know, when I do that, it's because the author or the recorder has used italics, and that is just a way of making sure you knew that these were words that were brought specifically into her mind. I don't have to do them every time. It may get to be a little bit too much. I don't think it takes away from the message if I do not. So I may do it, I may not. It won't be consistent. It is important to understand my true origins and my early youthful characteristics, because these were the goads which pushed and prodded me into eventual Christhood. What I most strongly detested and resisted was the misery, the sickness and poverty I saw around me. It infuriated me, and I became passionately, vociferously angry to see people dressed in rags, thin and hungry, diseased, crippled, yet heartlessly browbeaten by Jewish leaders who burdened them with meaningless traditions, laws, and observances, threatening them with Jehovah's punishment if they did not obey. I declared to all who would listen to me that these poor people had enough to bear without being crushed by senseless measures restrictive of pleasure. What was the point of life at all if we were not born to be happy? I refused to believe in a just God according to Jewish traditions. The biblical prophetic warnings of Jehovah's judgment and anger against people disgusted me. People were human after all, doing whatever their human natures prompted them to do. They had been born sinful, so why should they be judged and condemned to live lives of suffering and poverty because they had broken the 10 Commandments? Where was the sense in such statements? To me, this Jewish belief depicted an illogical, cruel God, and I wanted nothing to do with him. It seemed to me that if such a deity existed, it followed that mankind was doomed to eternal misery. The simplicity and freedom I found on the hillsides, the plains, the lakes, and the mountains refreshed my inmost spirit and quieted my angry murmuring against the Jewish God. Consequently, I refused to believe a word that the Jewish elders tried to teach me. However, during my middle 20s, a new line of questioning took possession of my thoughts. As I walked ever more frequently alone in the hills, my rebellion was gradually replaced by an all-consuming longing to know and understand the true nature of that which must surely inspire and re-inspire through creation. I reviewed my lifestyle and saw what my suffering. Let me rewind that. I reviewed my lifestyle and saw what suffering my actions had caused my mother and many other people. Although I felt such deep compassion for the weak and suffering, my rebellious nature had prompted much thoughtless and selfish behavior towards my family. My underlying love for them now welled up in me, and I found myself becoming equally rebellious against my past behavior. I heard talk about John the Baptist and the work he was doing amongst the Jews who came to listen to his words, even from Jerusalem. I decided to visit him to be baptized myself. On my way to the River Jordan, I felt exhilarated at the prospect of being baptized and starting a new life. I knew that despite my unruly emotionalism, I had also been born with a keen intelligence and a gift for insightful, impressive debate, which I had used willfully and negatively, leading people into unruly arguments. I had thrown my talents away by pursuing a life of self-will, idleness, and pleasure. As a result, I had forfeited all respect from others. Neither did I possess any self-respect. For the first time, I found this to be intolerable. It occurred to me that, in the future, I could and must put my natural gifts to better use. Instead of just making a noise, perhaps I could find a way to lighten the burdens of those whom I so deeply pitied. Up to that time, I had been of little practical use to anyone. My baptism. When I entered the water in the River Jordan to be baptized by John, I expected to feel nothing more than relief I had for once taken a positive step in reforming my behavior. I expected to feel a new determination to go home and astonish my mother and neighbors with my new kindly attitudes towards them. What really happened when John baptized me was an experience completely different to anything I had ever thought possible. I felt a great wave of tremendous energy surge through my body. I was literally stunned by it. As I staggered out of the river, I felt myself elevated in consciousness in a most extraordinary way. A great inflow of glowing happiness uplifted me to a state of ecstasy. I was enraptured and aware of a great light. Stumbling, I moved away from the river and walked, not knowing where I was going. I continued on, unseeingly, into the desert. Please note, my 6 weeks in the desert were a time of total inner cleansing of my human consciousness. Old attitudes, beliefs, and prejudices were dissolved. The time has come for me to share with receptive people all that I felt, saw, realized, and understood. To help people abandon the age-old imaginative pictures of a biblical deity, I will avoid referring to God by that word, and will use a terminology designed to stretch your minds to embrace what really is beyond all earthly form, color, sound, emotion, and comprehension. This terminology will become ever more meaningful as you persevere in meditation and prayer. What I felt when in the desert. I was uplifted into inner radiant light and felt vibrant and wondrously alive with power. I was filled with ecstasy and joy, and I knew beyond all doubt that this power was the true creator out of which all created things had been given their being. This glorious interior harmony, peace, and sense of perfect fulfillment, needing nothing more to be added to that beautiful moment, was the very nature of the reality, the creative power, giving life to creation and existence. What I saw, realized, perceived when in the desert. I was lifted into another dimension of conscious perception, which enabled me to see the truth concerning life and existence. I saw lucidly and clearly what was real and what was false in man's thinking. I realized that this creative power I was experiencing was infinite, eternal, universal, filling all space beyond sky, oceans, earth, and all living things. I saw it was mind power. It was the creative power of mind. There was no point where this divine creative power of mind was not. I realized that human mind was drawn from divine creative mind, but was only a candle lit by the sun. At times, my human sight was so spiritually heightened, I could see through rocks, earth, sand. These now appeared to be only a shimmer of tiny motes. I realized that nothing was really solid. When I had moments of doubt that this could be so, the changes in the phenomena stopped taking place. And much later, I discovered that my thoughts, if strongly imbued with conviction, could effect changes in the shimmer of motes, what science presently calls electrically charged particles, and therefore produce changes in the appearance of the rock or whatever I was studying. It was at this point that I came to realize the powerful effect that conviction or unwavering faith had on the environment when stating a command or even a belief. What was even more startling was my mind-opening cosmic consciousness, realization that all I had been witnessing was really the creative power of divine mind itself, made visible in the shimmer of tiny motes. Not only this, its appearance could be profoundly affected by the activity of human thought. I realized there was nothing solid in the universe. Everything visible was manifesting a different state of consciousness, which determined the composition and form of the shimmer of motes. Therefore, all outer form was an expression of the inner consciousness. Life and consciousness, I realized, were one and the same thing. It was impossible to say, this is life and that is consciousness. Consciousness was life and life was consciousness, and was the creative power of both, divine universal mind, beyond, within, and behind the universe. I realized that people placed highest importance on individuality and form. They could not imagine mind or intelligence operating in any effective way other than through the medium of individual form. Because of this, the Jews had created a mental image of a vast supreme being, having all the attributes, positive and negative, of a human being. Thus was it possible for prophets to believe in and speak of Jehovah's anger, threats of punishment, visitations of sickness and plagues in response to human waywardness. But these mental images, I realized, were myths. They did not exist. I perceived that in any dimension of existence, it was the mind, the intelligence exhibited, which was the all-important factor relating to creation and man himself. Therefore, Genesis should be rewritten. Before creation was universal mind, creative power behind and within creation itself. Having seen so clearly beyond all dispute that the creative power of universal mind was everywhere, within the infinity of the skies and active within earthly forms as well, I was inwardly directed to look around me and saw only gravel and rock. Then, suddenly, I was presented with a picture of a beautiful land in which were growing every conceivable plant, shrub, and tree. Even birds flitted in the trees and animals grazed the grass. Watching this vision with amazement, I saw that plants and trees, every one of them, and yes, even birds, animals, and insects, in reality, were composed of hundreds of communities of infinitely tiny entities. Your modern scientists call them cells, working continuously in an entirely harmonious spirit of cooperation to produce the substance and various organs of their inner system and the outer appearance of the completed living entity. I contemplated this wonderful activity for a long time, although time was no longer of any importance to me. As I gazed and gazed, I thought, who would have guessed that within the outer covering of fur, feather, skin, there was such intense activity within tiny communities of entities, working together to give life, form, nutrition, healing, protection, endurance to the bodies of so many different species. It was the intelligently performed work which attracted my attention. Therefore, work, I realized, was an integral part of the creative power activity, from the very least entity or cell within living systems to the most advanced entity in the universe, man himself. In the system of all living things, all the labor was under the direction, ultimately, of the divine creative power, in whom were the plans and designs of creation. I saw that these plans and designs were in reality consciousness forms and could be termed words, since each word signifies a very special consciousness form. Hence, the original word in creative power consciousness becomes manifested in the visible world. The word, and therefore the consciousness pattern, remains within the divine creative mind, continually bringing forth its own. I could see then that everything in the universe did live, move, and have its being in the creative power of universal mind, which was infinite and eternal, and was the only true reality behind all manifestations of individualized form. I was filled with praise that everything in the world was out of and yet within this superlative creative power of divine mind. I marveled at all this secret activity forever taking place in all living things, including human bodies, and wondered how it was that such infinitely small units worked intelligently according to specified plans to produce unerringly the proposed form: tree, trunk, leaf, flower, fruit, insects, birds, animals, and human bodies. I then realized even more clearly that the creative power was the very source of all intelligent activity in the universe. If mankind possesses intelligence, it was only because he had drawn it from the universal source of all being. Furthermore, I was shown that the divine creative power always worked according to certain fundamental and exact principles of construction. I was shown that, just as men have clear characteristics and a well-defined nature in their self-presentation to the world at large, so did the creative power possess a clearly defined nature, distinct characteristics which could be clearly recognized in the manner that all living things, plants, animals, birds, men, were constructed and maintained. I saw that these principles and characteristics, clearly observable in the process of creation, were set, invariable laws governing all of existence. These laws are so much part of life that they are never questioned. They are undeviating and consistent. But there would be no such laws if there were no creative intelligence power manifesting itself through the universe. These principles of creation, the characteristics of the creative power itself, are as follows. And there's a note. I am translating them into your present tense because these principles are eternal. And let me just check and see how many we have. I think I may stop right here and read you because there are at least 9 principles when we're talking about the nature of creative power and creative intelligence power. There are about 9 of them. Some of them are very short and some of them are longer. Number 9, I can't find the ending to, so I'm assuming that may be the longest one or the last one. Let me take a look. I think, I can give you a few of them, and then we may pick up with the rest of them in the next video. So number 1, in going into, these are the principles of creation, the characteristics of the creative power itself. Number 1, the nature of the creative power is growth. Everything living always grows. Growth is a universal characteristic, an undeviating principle of existence. Number 2, the nature of the creative power is nutrition and nourishment. Nutrition and nourishment are a normal and marvelously organized process within bodies, which is evident to all who take the trouble to consider them. Nutrition is provided for all living things according to individual preferences, and the food is digested to promote health and well-being. When little creatures are born, milk is already supplied within the mother, ready and waiting for the newborn. This too is a mystifying principle of existence none can deny. No science can explain why such a fortuitous function within the system ensuring survival of the species should have originally come into being. The actual function itself may be understood, but not the why and the mainspring of the function. 3, the nature of the creative power is healing. So when he's talking about the nature of the creative power, he's talking about essentially God, although he said he will not refer to God as such in here. So he's talking about these are the natures and characteristics of God. I needed to clarify that for myself, just an aside. The nature of the creative power is healing. Healing is a natural characteristic of existence and can be said to be a natural perfecting process, which takes place to ensure individual comfort, but none can explain what prompts the activity of healing. Number 4, the nature of the creative power is protection. Protection is an integral characteristic of creative power, and all of its seeming miraculous activity in the world is geared towards protection. Today, your medical textbooks describe the various protective systems in your body, but when I was in the desert, I saw the characteristic of protection inherent in the intelligent creative power in the following way. As plants, birds, and animals were presented to me for inspired observation, I could see how every need of protection in bodies has been lovingly supplied, with the greatest attention to detail. 5. This characteristic of protection is combined with the other dynamic characteristic of fulfillment of need. This was made clearly apparent in the provision of hair, fur, and feathers to protect the skin of living creatures and to provide warmth in the cold and shelter in the heat. I saw that the tender endings of important and sensitive fingers and toes were all provided with appropriate protection of hoof and nail. Eyebrows protected eyes from sweat. Eyelids and lashes protected eyes from dust and damage. I realized that those animals which attracted flies were equipped with the kind of tails which would most speedily get rid of them. What a happy, joyous kind of love and caring were expressed in these small physical attributes, which seemed so small and inconsequential, and yet had such a profound bearing on the comfort of all living things. These physical luxuries, added to the basic physical design, were clearly the product of an intelligent of an intelligence which intended creation to be comfortable and happy, free of the stress which would have been experienced by man and beast if these luxury items had not been given them. Even the natural functions were so intelligently and comfortably designed as to call forth thanksgiving. Everything tucked so neatly out of sight. How blessed, how fortunate was mankind to be born into a life so wonderfully provided for. Again, my praises soared, and I was lifted on an inner golden light of rapturous wonder. For I now saw that in addition to freedom from stress, living creatures were also meant to express the exuberant, loving nature of the creative power. For this reason, they were equipped with limbs, arms, hands, legs and feet, fingers and toes, to enable them to move about, run, leap and dance, to be able to express their inmost thoughts and feelings. I even felt that if mankind longed to fly and grow wings and believed with all their hearts that they could do so, eventually they would begin growing something additional to enable them to fly. It was at this point of understanding of the nature of creative power that I came into the full consciousness of the love directing the works of the universal, intelligent, creative power. As I pondered this love, I realized that the mother in creation nourishes, protects, fulfills the needs, and tries to promote healing of offspring. This is the activity of love. Number 6, the innate characteristic of the loving, intelligent, creative power which has given creation its individual form and being is work. It works for us, in us, and through us. Its work is always, always, always prompted by love. This cosmic revelation filled me with joy and astonishment. What a wonderful world we lived in. It was the culminating point in my enlightenment and my overall view of the truth concerning the source of all being. I had already seen the reality of the physical bodies composed of various communities of identical, infinitely tiny entities working in a spirit of cooperation and harmony to produce the various components of the body: flesh, bone, blood, to eyes and hair. The only difference between these communities lay in the type of work demanded by their common goals. Surely the divine impulse behind all this intelligent, purposeful activity in the body was both the inspiration and foundation of man's own conduct. When people worked in unison to produce a planned objective, that was a question, it came out wrong, sorry. They drew intelligence and purpose from the creative power. Yet how very different was man's behavior when engaged in earthly construction or any other communal project, for it was inevitably characterized by arguments and dissension. I was brought to a realization of the infinite power of the intelligent creativity ever active within creation, maintaining order, cooperation, harmony, daily productivity, unequaled by man anywhere at any time. Number 7, survival, was a natural characteristic of the creative power. In every case, the most wonderful provision had been made for all living things to grow, be healed of illnesses and injury, nourished in order to keep the body healthy, and to produce its own kind in order to ensure survival on this earth. This was the only reality mankind could be absolutely sure of, and its activity was consistent, year in and year out. The sun, moon, stars all remained in their places for millennia, and it was recognized that they all possessed their own paths of movement. This phenomena was all part of the grand scheme for survival and creation. If this was so, how could there not be survival of the eternal flame, of loving intelligence, creative power, hidden within the created entities of every kind in the universe? Therefore, this world was but a shadow and image of the hidden worlds of loving, intelligent, creative power beyond this dimension. The reality of the entirety of creation lay beyond this visible world. Number 8, The inherent characteristic of loving intelligence, creative power, was rhythm. I saw that there was a rhythm in operation in the world. Everything was subject to seasons, which gave a blossoming and burgeoning of life, a growing season coming up to the ripening and harvest, and the production of seeds, which ensured the survival of plant life. Then there was the gradual dying away and rest period of winter. But nothing created and living was allowed to become extinct. The sun and moon expressed these characteristics within the universe. This rhythm could even be seen in the females of living things. Therefore, everything in creation had its due time for appearance and harvest. It followed that man himself was subject to tides of growth and success and tides of dormancy. And number 9, the inherent characteristic of the loving, intelligent, creative power was law and order. The undeviating order and reliability apparent in creation, even governing the tiny entities or cells within the body, were astonishing and far transcended any human endeavor. Therefore, the entire universe was operating under a system of perfect law and order. I realized on ever higher and higher levels of spiritual exaltation that the creative power exhibited intelligent purposefulness, but an intelligent, loving creative power, which I could actually feel within myself as a tremendously heightened state of being, perception, radiance, ecstasy, joy, love. I knew myself to be one with it, filled with it, and I was one with everything around me and one with the sky and stars. And, most wonderful and glorious of all, the very nature and function of this Father, or creative power, was to work in order to create joy, beauty, and comfort, to ensure mankind's well-being, to work within mankind to provide interior joy, health, and comfort, and to work through mankind, inspiring him with new realization and understanding. Wonderful vistas of glorious creativity came to mind. Once we became truly at one, purified channels and instruments of the intelligent creative power, we could gradually ascend in consciousness until we truly expressed through our minds and hearts the very nature of the universal creative power. Then life on earth would indeed become a state of heaven at all times, and we would enter into a state of eternal life. This must surely be the true goal behind creation, I thought. And it came to me with a surge of elation and loving joy that this was the purpose for which man had been evolved and developed. But even at this present time, although mankind was so very imperfect in his behavior, absolutely nothing was impossible to him in the future, since, despite his wrongdoing, he was one with the creative power, and the creative power was within him, giving him life, limb, and everything else he needed. All of this realization lifted me to the heights of rapture, elation, and sublime ecstasy, so that I was scarcely able to bear it. I felt my body must dissolve with the expansion of power within me. I was irradiated with light, and I could see it all around me, illuminating the desert scene. My heart sang in praises. How wonderful and beautiful was the loving creative power which worked in, through, and for us unceasingly. What a miracle was creation. I cried out loud, "You are the source of all being, both creator and also manifested within and through the created. There is nothing in the entire universe which is apart or separate from the limitless, eternal infinity of divine life, creative power consciousness that you are. How then is it possible that mankind is so sinful? And why do people suffer disease, misery, and poverty? Tell me, O loving Father creative power, because I have been heavily burdened with the pain of their miserable lives. Then I was shown the reality of the earthly condition of all living things. All right, I'm going to stop right there. I feel that's a fitting place to stop. And in the next section of this letter, Jesus is going to show us the reality of the earthly condition of all living things and answering the questions that he has asked aloud. Why do we sin? Why is there suffering? Why is there disease and poverty? So we'll stop right there. I have 3 bookmarks going in this book because I'm reading it to myself. So here's my bookmark. I'm reading it to you guys. So here's this bookmark. And I'm also reading this 1 or 2 pages at a time to my husband. And here's his bookmark. So I'm going to try really hard not to get them confused. Thank you all so very much for joining me. I love you all very much. Until I see you again, take care of yourselves, take care of those around you, and I will see you again for our next section in letter 1. Take care until then. Bye-bye.